So our next speaker is um, a professor at the National Institute of Physics, University of the Philippines in Diliman. He applies his current research in optics, materials, signal processing, and complex systems to various multidisciplinary projects and engagements ranging from environmental monitoring to biology. Is actively teaching and mentoring undergraduate and graduate students in his sync.bio.optics research group at the Instrumentation Physics Laboratory. Just last August 1, he finished his first year rather, as the Dean of the College of Science of UP Diliman. Everyone, please welcome Dr. Giovanni Tapang, who will talk about AI for whom.
Good morning. Sorry. Um, Thank you very much, Ross. Good morning to everybody. I will be talking, as you can see, there's an eagle here. I will be talking about my recent engagement with an application of AI and um, touch on some of the points that Dr. Mercedes has already discussed earlier. Um, but let me talk about the story first of how I how we got about using a remote monitor camera for monitoring a Philippine hawk eagle just before the lockdown happened. I was working with Miss Jelaine Gan. She's currently just got her MS in biology at the UPD, and we she her topic is about Philippine hawk eagles, and she approached me around March 2019, and asked me if I could make a camera for her so that she can monitor these birds for her thesis. Now, the Philippine hawk eagles are forest specialist species. They inhabit forest, and they number to around 400 to 600 mature individuals in the wild here in the country. Now, uh, so from 2019 of March, we started to build a camera trap, thinking that we will have to climb a tree, put a camera trap there, put a solar charging station, and figure out a way to beam the data over Wi-Fi, so that she could be monitoring this even during the times that she would be going on other sites on her field work for her thesis in the whole of Luzon. Um, but come about around November, it turned out that the original hawk eagle nest that she was observing was was slowly becoming unused, and it apparently happened that the hawk eagle moved around and shifted its nest to another location nearby. So what we were trying to do at that time from November to December was to look around for this hawk eagle nest, and finally she found it to um, have a new nest sometime January, and fortunately enough it was very near a residential area where she was able to set up a remote camera, and therefore the technical details of having this remote monitor became much easier. So we had to just use a Raspberry Pi, slap a Raspberry Pi camera, connect it to a spotting scope using a 3D printer, and then plug in a Motion iOS, a turnkey software that enables you to monitor and use your Raspberry Pi as a camera that you could now send data to the internet. Now, eventually, just around February 11 or so, we were able to connect this camera, make it live, and it started to give us images of one per minute for over 24 for the whole of 24 hours, starting February 11. Now, as you would remember, just around March, mid-March, the lockdown happened. Jelaine was planning to go regularly to the site and observe on site and doing what field biologists would normally do. But because of the pandemic, she was unable to do it. However, she was very, very fortunate that she had this remote monitor that gave her 840 images during daytime that she was able to use to finish her thesis. Now, this actually was the problem why we ended up using artificial machine learning, because it is very tedious for her to be able to run through all of the 63,000 images to figure out to answer her biology questions. This is on top of the videos that the monitor was making every time there was movement that it has detected. And so this has been running since February 11, with some uh, days that were offline because of either a dog knocked out the power cable or there was a typhoon. So it survived until recently, until July 31, where we had to bring it in just in anticipation of the stormy weathers that will be coming in. So what was supposed to be a temporary setup became a relatively um, long monitoring time that it has been moving on, taking pictures since July until July 31 of this year. Now, these are the images that we were seeing. You would see the small bird there, the chick. She named it Fluffy. So Fluffy is that little ball of white feathers there. And we were able to see how Fluffy grew until around May, where Fluffy actually started to fledge. Now, so this is a time lapse of a usual day, and this is the kind of data that Jelaine was trying to analyze. So she was trying to see how long would the mother or the father would sit in the nest. In other words, the nest occupancy, and therefore we needed the way to figure out to distinguish whether there was a bird or no bird in the nest, and also the position, whether the bird is sitting or standing in the nest. So over time, Jelaine tried to get pictures from these classes, whether there was birds, no birds, standing or no standing, and this is what we used as an input for her models. And she ended up using this data in her thesis, where she found that over the time that the eagle was brooding, and she saw that mostly the parents would be sitting, and during the time where Fluffy hatched, which is around March 1, you would see that the time that the mother was sitting down slowly decreased until the time where Fluffy actually fledged. These are the the number of test images, the data sets that we use, the validation, as well as the testing for both the occupancy and the position model that you saw. So this actually gave us a very good taste of how to use machine learning in environmental monitoring. And right after her thesis, and during the lockdown, we thought of extending this and adding a microphone. So of course not with that eagle, but to figure out whether what happens to the birds during this lockdown. Did the do birds actually respond to the urban built environment, or do they respond to people, to the presence of people? And the ECQ, and right now the MECQ, gave us a very good time to study the absence of people in a environment like the university. And we were actually talking with other researchers in the Ateneo if possibly we could connect this and monitor the whole Katipunan corridor. Currently, there's only two microphones, one in my office in the College of Science, and the other one in my office in the National Institute of Physics. But what we were doing is to sample every 5 minutes, take a 25 megabyte sample of wave files, upload it every 6 minutes. The 1 minute interval there is for processing and for uploading, and use machine learning to identify which parts of the sound, the wave file, is a bird or a distinct sound such as a motorcycle, a car, or even crickets or other environmental sounds. It's still ongoing, and we have started it this July 19. Now, the reason why I discuss these two projects is that I'd like to discuss only two aspects of the question of AI and ethics. And number one, and both of these were already discussed earlier by our first speaker. The first one is, of course, how is that our models are as good as our data sets, and what does it actually mean for artificial intelligence and its applications, as well as the control of the tools to build these models. Now, the first question, of course, is about the data, and the applications that we were using to do environmental monitoring is to put sensors everywhere. And of course, the application of a camera on an eagle nest is actually very limited, but you could think of not just the eagle nest, but point it to a house, to a street, to just like our ordinary CCTVs that we have all around right now in our subdivisions, in our streets, in our barangays, and all. Now, if we actually also have other sensors like microphones that are connected and be monitoring passively at every areas where we are moving around, and these sensors are really becoming very, very cheap. I mean, this setup with the Raspberry Pi and the microphone, we actually bought it from Lazada, only cost around 2,000 pesos, 2,000 to 2,005 pesos. Now, the figure at the bottom is a multi-sensor device that we built for the Marine Science Institute together with Dr. Alet Iniguez, where we have a temperature, salinity, pH, depth, chlorophyll sensors that we are deploying at different areas and in different depths, so that we can really monitor the environmental state of our oceans. Now, with all these sensors being very, very cheap and already connected to the internet and feeding our data sets, where we can now build our models for machine learning, the question ends up is that who really determines what can be recorded? Our passive sensors, like the microphones, for example, I just place it outside my window, and people who were walking around will be recorded. The cars in Katipunan, where my office is actually facing, are being recorded. In fact, I can most probably determine the traffic load from the amount of noise that I get to detect in that window at NIP. Now, of course, we do have a deployment of CCTVs in our barangays right now, and local government units are actually building their capability to have these CCTVs deployed, and all of them are actually connected. All of them are gathering data, but who determines actually what can be recorded, as well as when does these um, monitoring become surveillance already? Um, the microphone that I have in my office is actually connected as well to a camera. And earlier, this is the capture of that sound, as well as um, the the image that is accompanying it. That sound is actually a motorcycle, and I can count how many motorcycles pass by in front of the office. And if I were looking for um, motorcycles, then I could very well make a model to determine these motorcycles, as well as other things that I would like to monitor um, given the sensors that I have. Um, and therefore, the question is, of course, whether who owns these sensors. If there are passive sensors like our microphones, like our cameras, or you can actually also have active sensors where you can train. Put your cameras in a direction where you can actually look at that direction actively. Now, there are coverage of data privacy laws. Most of our CCTVs would have disclaimers that in public places you don't really expect privacy, and therefore that's why they do install CCTVs. But even the use of this CCTV data would actually be regulated. You would have to have permission to access them. But what about these cheap sensors that we carry in our pockets? What about where your cell phones actually have the microphone, the cameras, and the internet uploading capability, and even the processing power that could do all of these machine learning and AI models that we are doing? Um, a note about the density of the deployment of the sensors. This is currently the coverage of the clear um, range at which my microphones can hear. But what if we actually build and put off all these cheap microphones in all of the buildings of the College of Science? Then we could actually determine um, where one bird is actually moving. That's in the context of environmental monitoring, or if you want in the context of surveillance, how one person's conversation can be tracked from the National Institute of Physics to the Natural Science Research Institute as they walk around the College of Science. So that's a question really that has to be um, answered. Who owns the picture of your smile? Who would benefit from hearing your sigh or the conversation that you have? These are things that we have to answer while we're building all these network sensors, while we're building all of these models that we have. Um, and that's the crux of the problem of the question of ownership of data. Of course, earlier it was discussed also that there could be biased decision based on either lack of data. I mean, if we're trying to do environmental monitoring and we don't have a sensor, even a sound sensor in a certain area, then obviously you would actually undersample and underrepresent those birds, those insects that will be there in that area where you have no microphone. Biased data, in other words, on the other side, of course, is all about putting in the data that you think would be useful, but you're missing out on other things that should be there to have a good decision or inference that you would come out from your data set. And of course, missing data, our experience with the pandemic data right now, whenever there is a missing data or not data that is not so clean, it's very hard to make models, epidemiological or otherwise, from data sets that are perennially or um, not clean, and therefore we really have to exert effort not only to make our models robust from these missing data, as well as to take into account the problems when gathering these ones. The other side of the question, of course, that I'd like to raise is about control. Who control not only the data but also the tools. Um, we've been using different models. Some of them, of course, are open source, but at the end of the day, there is a big company that is actually backing the use of Keras, the use of TensorFlow, the use of all of these tools that we're using um, to run our models. And it's not just the models, the platforms that we use, but also the hardware. Um, More and more, we are getting to be specialized in the chipsets that we use. We depend mainly on GPUs right now because these are the things that are available to ordinary researchers. But there are, of course, very specialized hardware that you can use, such as FPGAs, GPUs, and other built systems that you can use to do your AI models. And these are, you are locked in essentially to these companies who make these hardware as well. Even if you go to the cloud, of course, is owned by big companies who have their own agenda as well, and they're pushing their own uh, walled gardens to us. Very rarely do you have interactivity or interconnectivity between these clouds without doing a lot of work. Now, it's not just the companies, of course, but also states. Um, States would have their own AI strategies, and we should be aware that at the end of the day, um, these companies and these states would be the ones that would determine the the rollout or the end use of many of our AI applications that we use. Um, and therefore, the question of AI for whom is really a question of control. The control of data, the control of the hardware, the control of the software, the control of the platform, the control of the enabling technologies that back the very wonderful idea and application of artificial intelligence. And unless we can um, clearly answer this question of who dictates the use of the artificial intelligence, then we end up with doing AI not really for the benefit of many, but the benefit of those who are in control, usually the companies or the states. So thank you very much, and good morning to everybody.
Thank you very much, Dean Gani, for your very interesting talk on the use of machine learning and Internet of Things to analyze bird behavior, monitor urban sounds, and for bringing up issues on sensor and data ownership, privacy, regulation and control, and possible abuses on the use of this data for surveillance purposes. So we need to address questions like when does monitoring end and surveillance begin? Again, I encourage everyone to ask questions for for Dean Gani Tapang and the other speakers later on. You can also ask questions, of course, address them to Dr. Drigo. But the moment, please type them now in the chat box below. Also, since there are several speakers in this session, please indicate the name of the speaker to whom your question is directed in order to avoid rather confusion later on.